My son's best friend confessed at the funeral that he caused the accident that killed him. The eulogy was almost over when Ryan stood up and said he had something to tell us. I didn't think anything of it at first. Ryan had known my son for 18 years. Of course he wanted to speak. Of course he was going to say something about Marcus. They'd grown up 3 houses apart, played Little League together, drove to school together every morning for 4 years. If anyone had the right to stand at that podium and talk about my son, it was him. But Ryan didn't walk to the podium. He stayed where he was, standing in the third pew. And his voice, when it came out, wasn't the voice of someone giving a eulogy. It was the voice of someone confessing. He said, "Mr. and Mrs. Holt, I need you to know what actually happened that night." The church went so quiet I could hear the candles. My name is Carol Holt. I'm 54 years old. I taught 3rd grade for 22 years before I retired, and I spent most of those years telling 8-year-olds that telling the truth is always the right thing to do, no matter how scared you are. I believed that. I'm not sure I still do. Or maybe I believe it even more now, and I just understand what it costs. My son Marcus died on a Tuesday in March. He was 26 years old. A car accident on Route 17, just after midnight. The other driver ran a red light, the police said. Marcus's side of the car took the full impact. He didn't make it to the hospital. That's what we were told. That's what I lived with for 11 days, from the night of the accident to the morning of the funeral. 11 days of believing one thing. And then Ryan stood up in that church, and the truth walked in like it had always been waiting outside, just giving us a little time first. Before I tell you what Ryan said, I need to tell you about Marcus. Because he deserves more than a footnote in a story about his own death. Marcus was the kind of person who filled a room without knowing it, not loud, not the center of attention by effort. He just had a quality that made people feel seen when he looked at them. He'd inherited it from his father, my husband Tom, who has the same thing, that particular steadiness that makes you feel like whatever you're saying actually matters to the person listening. He worked in logistics for a shipping company. Not glamorous, he didn't care. He was good at it, he liked his colleagues, he came home on time and called me on Sundays and remembered my sister's birthday even when I forgot it. He was the kind of person who, when you told him something difficult, didn't immediately try to fix it. He just listened. Really listened, the way that some people do, not waiting for their turn, but actually receiving what you're saying. His college roommate told me at the reception after the funeral that Marcus had talked him through a bad period in sophomore year. A period bad enough that the roommate hadn't told anyone about it. And he'd told Marcus, because Marcus was the kind of person you told things to. He didn't give advice, the roommate said. He just made you feel like whatever you were going through was survivable, because of the way he listened to it. He had been teaching himself guitar, badly, for about 6 months before he died. He played in his apartment at night, and it was genuinely not good, and he found this hilarious. He would send me voice memos of his attempts at songs he liked, and they would be recognizable and also somewhat painful, and he would caption them things like, "Progress." And I would write back, "Absolutely not." This made him laugh every time. He was 26 years old, and he had just started dating someone seriously for the first time in 2 years. Her name was Priya. She was sitting in the front row at the funeral. I kept looking at her face during the service and thinking, you barely knew him. You only had 4 months. And yet here you are, and you're as broken as the rest of us, and that tells me everything about what he was. That's Marcus. I need you to hold on to that while I tell you the rest. Ryan Caswell had been Marcus's best friend since they were 8 years old. If you had asked me, the week before the accident, to describe Ryan, I would have said, good kid, always has been. Steadier than Marcus in some ways, more cautious. The one who checked the weather before a camping trip, who actually read the fine print, who showed up early to things. He'd become an accountant, which suited him. His mother Carol, confusingly, same name as mine, was one of my closest friends. Our families had shared Thanksgivings and Christmases and 4th of July cookouts for nearly 2 decades. He was family. That's the thing I keep coming back to, not a stranger. Not someone who wandered into our lives and took something. Someone who had been at our kitchen table so many times he knew which drawer had the extra batteries. Someone I had watched grow up. The night Marcus died, The official story was this: Marcus had been driving home from Ryan's apartment. They'd had a few drinks, this we knew. It was in the police report. His blood alcohol was 0.7, just under the legal limit. He was on Route 17, heading south. At the intersection of Route 17 and Millbrook Road, another vehicle ran the red light heading east and struck Marcus's car on the driver's side. The other driver, a 53-year-old man named Gerald Hooper, sustained minor injuries. He told police he had a green light. His blood alcohol was 0. He was cooperative and distraught. The dashcam footage from a nearby intersection was reviewed. It was at an angle and inconclusive. You could see the moment of impact, but not clearly which vehicle had the green light. 2 witnesses at the scene gave conflicting accounts. One said the other driver had the green. One wasn't sure. The investigation was ongoing at the time of the funeral. No charges had been filed against Gerald Hooper. The prevailing understanding, in the absence of conclusive evidence, was that it had been a tragic accident. Possibly Marcus's fault, possibly Hooper's, possibly just one of those terrible intersections where the timing and the angles conspire against everyone. That was the story. Here is what Ryan told us. I'm going to write this the way it happened. In the church, Ryan standing in the third pew, his hands at his sides, his face the color of old paper. He said Marcus had not driven from Ryan's apartment that night. Ryan had been driving. They'd had more to drink than the police report suggested. Ryan's blood alcohol, had it been tested, would have been over the limit. Marcus's was at 0.7 because Marcus had stopped drinking earlier in the evening. Marcus had tried to give Ryan his keys. Ryan had refused. They'd argued about it. A real argument raised voices in the parking lot of Ryan's building. And Ryan had won by getting into the driver's seat first and locking the door. And Marcus had gotten in the passenger seat because it was 1 a.m. and he didn't know what else to do. At the intersection of Route 17 and Millbrook Road, Ryan had run the red light. Not Gerald Hooper. Ryan. After the impact, Ryan told the police Marcus had been driving. He said he'd been in the passenger seat. He was not significantly injured. He was coherent. He lied. He gave this statement standing on the side of Route 17 while paramedics were still working on my son 20 feet away. He gave it efficiently and without hesitation. He had made the calculation, I don't know how consciously. I've thought about this many times, and I still don't know whether it was a decision, or just the body's animal self-preservation firing before the thinking brain could intervene. And he had said the wrong name, and he had kept saying it through every subsequent question. The police had no reason to doubt him. The dashcam was inconclusive, the witnesses conflicted. Marcus was dead and couldn't contradict the story. Ryan submitted to a breathalyzer at the scene, standard, and blue 0.9. But he told the police he was the passenger and had been drinking at the apartment, and they wrote it down. And then he came to our house. He sat in our kitchen the morning after the accident. He held my hand when I cried. He helped Tom make phone calls. He ate a sandwich that my sister had made, and he told us how much Marcus had meant to him, and every word of it was true. Which is the part I still find most incomprehensible, that you can say true things while concealing the thing that changes what all the true things mean. He came to the wake. He stood at the casket. I watched him put his hand briefly on the wood and I thought, there it is, that's the friendship, 18 years and it comes to this moment where you put your hand on the wood. I didn't know what he was carrying when he did it. I didn't know what it cost him. Gerald Hooper, who had a green light and had done nothing wrong, had spent 11 days believing he might have killed a 26-year-old man. The church was silent when Ryan finished. I mean that. Not the polite quiet of people listening. Not the held breath quiet of something shocking. The deeper quiet of a room in which everyone has simultaneously understood something that changes the shape of everything before it. The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then a sound started behind me, not words. Just a sound, low and involuntary, coming from Ryan's mother Carol. And the sound of that was almost worse than anything Ryan had said, because Carol Caswell was one of the most composed women I knew, and what I was hearing from her was the sound of composure failing all the way through. I was in the front row. Tom was next to me. His hand had been on mine since the service started. I felt his hand go rigid. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at Ryan. I stared at the photograph of Marcus on the easel beside the altar, his work headshot, the one where he's smiling that slight smile, like he's in on a joke you haven't heard yet, and I thought, he tried to give you his keys. He tried. And then I thought, he got in the passenger seat because it was 1 in the morning and he didn't know what else to do. That's so Marcus. That is so exactly, precisely Marcus. He would have fought about it in the parking lot, and lost and gotten in the car, because he couldn't figure out how to stop it from there, and he would have been thinking the whole way that it would probably be fine, that Ryan was always careful. That it was a short drive, he would have been thinking it would probably be fine. The pastor had come down from the pulpit. He was standing near Ryan now, his hand on Ryan's shoulder. I noticed this the way you notice peripheral details when the center is too large to look at directly. Ryan was sitting with his face in his hands, not the performance of grief, the actual thing. His shoulders were shaking, and he wasn't making any sound that I could hear. Part of me, the part that had known him since he was 8 years old, that had fed him dinner probably 400 times. That had driven him to his SAT when his parents were out of town. That part registered the shaking shoulders, and felt something that I cannot honestly call compassion, but was not entirely the opposite of it either. The other part of me was calculating. Numbly, automatically, the way a person calculates when they are too stunned to feel anything, and calculation is the only thing still running. 11 days, that part was saying. You had 11 days. You sat next to us at the wake. You hugged us both. You cried at the graveside, and I thought your grief was the real thing, and I was right that it was real. You were grieving. You just weren't grieving the same thing we were. You were grieving your own life. The pastor said something about taking a moment. About the service resuming in a few minutes when everyone had a chance to collect themselves. His voice had the carefully neutral quality of someone who has been trained for unexpected situations and is now in one. Tom's hand was still rigid in mine. If you're still with me, thank you. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And tell me this, have you ever had a moment where someone said something that split your life into before and after? Because that's what the next 60 seconds were. People come to your house after a funeral. I don't know if I ever fully understood this ritual until that day. The way people feel they need to be somewhere with you, and the way the somewhere becomes your house. And the way the house fills up with food that nobody asked for, and voices that are trying very hard to be the right volume, and faces cycling through expressions that don't quite fit, because there is no expression that fits. We came back from the church to find 12 people already in our kitchen. My sister Ruth had let them in. She had organized everything from the moment the service ended. She's always been the one who knows what to do with her hands in a crisis. And what she does with them is feed people and arrange things and make sure no surface is empty of something that looks like care. I sat on the couch. The conversations happening around me had a particular quality. People were talking about Ryan. In low voices, clustered by the kitchen doorway, bent toward each other. There was shock in the voices, and also the thing that happens when a story is new, and people are still working out what it means. That particular low-frequency hum of a community trying to process something. I watched them from the couch and I thought, in 6 months this will be a story people tell. In a year it will have a shape. In 10 years someone will remember it at a dinner and say, do you remember when, at that funeral? And Marcus will be the background of the story. I got up and went to the backyard. It was cold. March in Ohio is almost always cold. The yard was brown and flat, and waiting for spring in the resigned way that yards wait for spring. And I stood on the patio in my funeral clothes, and I breathed the cold air, and I didn't think about anything for about 3 minutes. Just the cold and the brown yard and the sound of the house behind me. Tom found me there. He didn't say anything. He stood next to me and put his arm around me, and we stood there in the cold backyard together. After a while he said, Ryan knew this whole time. Yes, he was at the hospital when they told us. He was standing right there. I know, Tom exhaled slowly. In the cold air his breath was visible, a small white cloud that dissipated. I'm not ready to know how I feel about that, he said. Me neither. We went back inside after a while because Ruth appeared at the back door with that look that means come in, and I think she was right to come get us. The last people left at 9 o'clock. My sister stayed, she did the dishes. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her do the dishes, and I thought about what it means to have a person who will come and do your dishes after the worst day of your life without being asked. I didn't say any of this to her. But she probably knew. When she left, she held me for a long time in the doorway. She said, "Call me if you wake up at 3. I said, "I will." She said, "I mean it." She does mean it. That's the thing about Ruth. She says things she means. Tom and I went to bed at 10:30. We didn't sleep. We lay in the dark, and the house was quiet around us in the specific way of a house after a day of too many people. A loud quiet, a ringing quiet, the kind that makes the previous noise more present rather than less. At some point Tom said he tried to give him his keys. I know, that was the last thing he did, tried to do. I know, a long silence. That's Marcus, Tom said. That's Marcus, I said. We lay there in the dark. Eventually Tom fell asleep. I lay there for another hour or two, not thinking exactly, more like occupying the space just below thought, where the feelings are too large to name and the mind just circles. At some point I remembered something. When Marcus was 14, he and Ryan had come home from a friend's party and Ryan had clearly had something to drink. The first time, probably, the way these things happen, a warm beer at someone's older brother's house. Marcus had been sober. He'd driven Ryan home on his bicycle, Ryan on the handlebars, and when they got to our house, Marcus had walked Ryan inside and put him on the couch and got him water and sat with him until he was okay. I hadn't thought about this in years. It surfaced in the dark like something floating up from the bottom of a lake. 14 years old, he was already doing it, looking after people. He was always doing that. I lay in the dark, and I thought about my 14-year-old son on a bicycle with his best friend on the handlebars, and I let myself feel the full weight of what that was, the love in it, the care in it. The continuous quiet act of looking after the people around him, and then I cried for a long time silently in the dark while Tom slept. It was the first time I'd cried since the service. Ryan's mother Carol was on her feet before anyone else moved. I heard her first. A sound I'd never heard from her before, not a word, just a sound. Ryan's father was next to her and he sat completely still, which was in some ways more disturbing than the sound. Tom let go of my hand, he stood up. He walked to the aisle and he stood there in his dark suit, 7 rows from Ryan, and he said very quietly, "Sit down, Ryan." Ryan sat down. Tom walked back to me, sat, took my hand again. That was it for the service. The pastor said a few words about the peace that passes understanding, which I have always found comforting, and which in that moment felt like it was being read from a manual in a foreign language. We stood when we were supposed to stand. We sat when we were supposed to sit. And then it was over, and people were filing out, and my sister was next to me asking if I needed water. And I realized I had been holding perfectly still for approximately 15 minutes, and my body had not understood that it was allowed to feel anything yet. I want to tell you what happened over the following weeks, because the story doesn't end in that church. Nothing ends in a church except the service. What happened was this, and I'm going to be as honest as I know how to be. It was complicated. Deeply, ungovernable, complicated in the way that only betrayal by someone you love can be. And I say love deliberately, because I did love Ryan Caswell. I had known him for 18 years. I had fed him dinner and worried about him when he had a hard year in college, and felt genuinely glad when he landed his accounting job. That didn't evaporate in the church. I wanted it to. It would have been so much easier if it had. The love and the rage were not separate things. They were the same thing turned inside out. Tom called a lawyer the day after the funeral, not because he was certain what he wanted to do, because he needed to understand what was possible. What the options were, what Ryan's confession in a church full of witnesses actually meant legally. The lawyer's name was Daniel Park. He was methodical and careful, and he laid it out without drama. Ryan's statement in the church was a public admission of culpability in a fatal accident. Combined with his original false statement to police, it constituted, at minimum, filing a false police report. The more serious question was whether his driving under the influence, now admitted, met the threshold for vehicular manslaughter. That depended on the blood alcohol. Ryan had blown 0.9 at the scene. But he'd told police he was the passenger and had been drinking at the apartment, and they hadn't questioned it. If he had been the driver, as he now admitted, that 09 reading was the reading of the driver of a vehicle that killed someone. The question, Daniel Park said, was whether we wanted to pursue it. Tom and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table that night. Neither of us could eat. He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I don't know yet." That was the honest answer. I've learned to respect it. Here is what I knew in the days after the funeral that I'm still sitting with. Ryan had been 26 years old, drunk, frightened. Standing at an accident scene with his best friend dying 20 feet away. And he had lied to the police because he was scared, and because people do terrible things when they are scared, and because the lie was right there, and the truth was going to destroy his life. I understood the mechanism. I'm a teacher. I spent 22 years watching children lie to protect themselves from consequences, watching them calculate in the span of a second whether the truth was survivable, watching them choose wrong and then have to live with it. I understood how it happened. Understanding how something happens does not make it okay. I want to be clear about that. But it changed the texture of what I felt. The person I was angriest at, in those first weeks, wasn't Ryan. It was the version of Ryan that had stood at that accident scene and made the calculation. The cold, functional, self-preserving version that had looked at my dying son and thought, "I can get out of this." That version of Ryan I didn't know, had never met. And I couldn't reconcile it with the 18 years I had, which meant I was living with a split image. Two Ryans, the one at my table and the one at that intersection. And they were the same person, which is the part you can't reason your way around. He came to the house 12 days after the funeral. I knew he would. He'd left 3 voicemails that I hadn't returned and 2 texts that Tom had answered with one word, "Not yet." Tom had answered them. I hadn't been able to look at Ryan's name on a screen without something happening in my chest that I didn't have the right word for. Not just grief. Not just rage. Something that was several feelings stacked on top of each other so close together they'd fused into one unnameable thing. When the doorbell rang, I was in the kitchen. Tom was in the garage. I looked at the door for a moment, and then I went and opened it. Ryan looked like he hadn't slept in 2 weeks. He probably hadn't. He'd lost weight that he hadn't had to lose. He was wearing a plain gray shirt, and his eyes had the specific exhausted quality of someone who has been crying intermittently for days, and has run out of whatever produces tears, but whose body keeps trying anyway. I had known this person since he was 8 years old. He had skinned his knee in front of our house once, and Marcus had run in to get me. I had cleaned up the scrape. I remembered the specific way he'd tried not to cry, jaw set, eyes up, just like that, because he was embarrassed in front of Marcus. That was 26 years ago. The man standing on my porch had the same jaw set, the same eyes. He said, "Can I come in?" I said, "No." He nodded, stayed on the porch. "Mrs. Holt, I don't have anything to say that makes this better, I know that, Why the church?" I said. "You had 11 days, you could have called. You could have gone to the police. Why did you choose to do it there?" He looked at the ground, then at me. Because I couldn't figure out how to say it to you privately, I kept picking up the phone and I couldn't do it. And then I was sitting there in the service and I kept thinking Marcus would have told the truth. In a second, he would have stood up and said it, and I thought, he stopped. "You thought what?" I thought I owed him that, at least that. I stood in the doorway. The thing about being a teacher for 22 years is that you develop a particular relationship to the moments when someone understands something for the first time. You learn to recognize the specific quality of a person who has just seen their own behavior clearly, maybe for the first time, and is sitting with what they see. It's uncomfortable to witness. It's also, unmistakably, real. Ryan was in that moment, I could see it. It didn't move me the way it would have moved me before, but I registered it. I said, "You owed him not getting in the car in the first place." He didn't answer, there wasn't anything to answer. "We're working with a lawyer," I told him. "I don't know yet what we're going to do. But I need you to understand that your decision to confess in a public setting, in the way you chose, was also a decision that made things harder for me. For Tom. For Priya. For everyone who was sitting in that church. You chose that setting because it was what you needed to do for yourself, and I understand it, but I want you to understand it too. He said, "I know. Go home, Ryan," he went. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was quiet around me, Tom's tools in the garage. Marcus's senior photo on the wall at the top of the stairs. The one where he's laughing at something off camera. That's my favorite one. The candid ones always are. I went back to the kitchen and I sat at the table and I didn't do anything for a long time. That's what the months after the funeral were, mostly. Long stretches of not doing anything, not in a dramatic way. Just the particular stillness of a person who is trying to figure out what shape her life is now and doesn't yet have an answer. The legal process moved slowly at first and then fast. Ryan hired a lawyer and went to the police voluntarily within 3 days of the funeral. He gave a full statement. His 09 reading from the night of the accident was now the reading of the admitted driver. The investigation was reopened. Tom handled most of the interaction with Daniel Park, our lawyer. I went to the first meeting and to the final ones, but the middle months, the back and forth, the procedural steps, the careful documentation, I left to Tom. Every time I engaged with it directly, something in me shut down. Not dramatically, more like a breaker tripping. I'd be fine and then I'd be reading a legal document and suddenly I couldn't hold the words. Tom was built for this in a way I wasn't. Or maybe he just needed the doing of it. Grief finds its form in different people. Mine went inward, his went into motion. Neither of us was wrong, neither of us was entirely okay. Gerald Hooper was contacted about 3 weeks after Ryan went to the police. He had been living for over 2 weeks, with the weight of believing he might have killed a 26-year-old man through his own negligence. When the detective called and told him that new information had emerged clearing him, he reportedly sat on the phone in silence for a long moment and then said, "I want to talk to the family." Tom spoke with him first. I couldn't yet. Tom told me afterward that Gerald Hooper had cried, that he'd been going to church every day since the accident, that he'd started having panic attacks at intersections, that he didn't know how to thank us. Tom had told him there was nothing to thank, that he'd done nothing wrong, that we were sorry for what he'd been carrying. What Tom didn't tell me until later was that Gerald had also asked about Marcus, what he was like, what he'd done, whether he'd been happy. Tom said he'd talked for almost 20 minutes. That Gerald had listened to all of it, that at the end he'd said, "He sounds like someone worth knowing." That phrase, worth knowing, I've thought about it more times than I can count. I thought about Gerald Hooper for a long time after that conversation. A 53-year-old man who had a green light and did everything right and spent weeks wondering if the rest of his life was going to be defined by 2 seconds at an intersection. He hadn't lost a child. But he had been made to carry a false weight, to walk around for weeks under the possibility that he had killed someone, to lie awake at night with that. Ryan's lie had done that to him too. A quieter harm, an invisible one, but real. The people who get hurt in these things are never just the obvious ones. Ryan's parents called us separately about a month after Ryan's arrest. His father first. A short call. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what else to say. He said they had raised Ryan to be honest, and he didn't know what had happened at that intersection. Tom took the call and I sat in the kitchen and I could hear his voice, low and steady, saying the things a person says when they are accepting an apology that doesn't come close to covering what happened. His mother Carol called me. I wasn't going to pick up. I held the phone and looked at her name, and then I picked up because she had been my friend for 20 years, and I didn't know yet what that meant now, but I knew I couldn't not answer. She said, "I know there's nothing I can say." I said, "I know." She said, "I keep thinking about Marcus in that parking lot trying to convince him. I keep thinking about Marcus getting in the car." I didn't say anything. "Ryan should have listened," she said. Her voice broke on it. "Yes," I said. "He should have." We sat in silence. She said, "I'm sorry, Carol, I'm so sorry." I said, "I know you are." And I did know, the sorrow was real, the guilt was real. Ryan's parents had not driven that car. They were living inside a version of what we were living, different in every essential way. Their son was alive and mine was not, but still something. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, entirely. But I stayed on the phone with her for a while. There's a period between the confession and the charging that people don't really talk about when they tell stories like this. The waiting period, the in-between. Ryan had gone to the police. The investigation was reopened. Daniel Park was communicating with the DA's office, and we were just living, waiting for something to be decided about a thing that had already happened. I went grocery shopping during this period. I taught a substitute day in April. I called my sister on Sundays. I watched television in the evenings with Tom, neither of us particularly watching it. The routines of a life continued to present themselves, and I continued, mostly, to perform them. Marcus's apartment needed to be cleared. Tom and I did this together on a Saturday in April, which was probably too soon, but we had run out of reasons to keep postponing it. He had lived in a one-bedroom on the third floor of a building near downtown. It smelled like him when we opened the door, his particular brand of coffee, the slight mustiness of books left in a pile, and I stood in the doorway for about 30 seconds before I could move. We were methodical. Tom made decisions about furniture. I took the personal things. Books. A photograph from a fishing trip with Tom when Marcus was 12, both of them squinting into the sun with a mediocre catch between them. A coffee mug with a crack in the handle that said "World's Okayest Fisherman" that Marcus had bought at a gas station as a gift for Tom one year, and that we both laughed at, and that had ended up at Marcus's place. I don't know when. In the kitchen drawer I found a notepad. Grocery lists mostly, reminders to himself. One page that said in his handwriting, "Call Priya back, don't be weird about it." Which made me laugh, a real laugh, the surprised kind. He was in the middle of things. That's what clearing an apartment teaches you. He was in the middle of his life. There was yogurt in the refrigerator with 3 days left before the use-by date. There were library books with a due date 2 weeks away. There was a suit jacket hung on the back of the closet door with a dry cleaning ticket in the pocket, dated the week before he died. He was going to pick up his dry cleaning. He was going to call Priya back and try not to be weird about it. He had 3 more days of yogurt. I sat on the edge of his bed for a while with the notepad in my hands. Tom came and sat next to me. We didn't talk. After a while, he put his arm around me and I leaned into him, and we just sat there in Marcus's apartment in the particular April light, which was the same light it always was, indifferent and clear. Ryan was charged with vehicular manslaughter in the 2nd degree, filing a false police report, and driving under the influence resulting in death. He pled guilty to all 3. His lawyer argued for the minimum. Ryan's voluntary confession, his full cooperation, his clean record, his age, the genuine remorse evidenced by the public confession at the funeral, all of it was presented to the judge as context. The judge sentenced him to 4 years. He would be eligible for parole in 2. I was in the courtroom for the sentencing. Tom was next to me. Ryan's parents were on the other side of the room, and I could not look at them, not because I blamed them, I didn't. Or not more than you blame anyone for raising a child who turns out to be capable of something terrible, but because looking at Carol Caswell meant looking at myself. Another mother. What do you do with that? Ryan's attorney had presented everything: the voluntary confession, the full cooperation, the clean record, the genuine remorse. He spoke for about 15 minutes. He was good at his job. He made Ryan into a human being who had made a catastrophic choice in a terrible moment, and had then, eventually, found the courage to face it. This was true. It was also, sitting in that courtroom, almost unbearable to listen to, because it was all accurate. Every compassionate frame he put around Ryan's decision was accurate, in its way. Ryan had been young and frightened, and the lie had happened fast, the way these things happen, before thought could intervene. Ryan had then spent 11 days in a version of hell. Ryan had confessed in the hardest possible setting. Ryan was genuinely remorseful, and my son was dead, both things, at the same time. The judge was a woman named Patricia Osa. She had a reputation for measured sentencing and for not speaking more than necessary. She reviewed the materials. She looked at Ryan. She looked at us. She said, "Nothing I do today brings Marcus Holt back. Nothing I do today is commensurate with the loss this family has experienced. The role of this proceeding is not to provide that kind of justice, because that kind doesn't exist. The role of this proceeding is to establish accountability and to send a message about the consequences of choices made on a public road." She sentenced him to 4 years, Eligible for parole in 2. Ryan's mother made a sound. Ryan himself kept very still. Then he turned and looked at us. Tom nodded once. A single small nod. I still don't know exactly what it meant. I think it might have meant, I see you. I think it might have meant, this is done now. I didn't move. Ryan was led out. That was the last time I saw him. I walked out of the courthouse into a gray November afternoon, and I stood on the steps for a moment before I could walk to the car. Tom stood next to me. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to summarize what had happened or tell me how I should feel about it. He just stood there. After a while I said, I need coffee. He said, there's a place on the corner. We went and got coffee. We sat at a small table and we didn't talk much, and it was the most normal 30 minutes I'd had in months, and I was almost more grateful for that than for any of the legal proceedings. Just a table, coffee, November light through a diner window. Tom across from me, both hands around his cup, not asking anything of me. I want to talk about Priya, because I think her part in this story is the one that moved me most and that I've spoken about least. She had 4 months with Marcus. She was 24 years old and she had 4 months. And at the end of them, she was sitting in the front row of a funeral for a man she had been falling in love with. And then in the middle of it, she found out that his death was not the accident it had appeared to be. She came to see me about a month after the sentencing. We had spoken on the phone a few times. She was quiet on the phone in the way of someone who is managing carefully, holding things together by concentration. In person, she was different. Smaller somehow, more present. We sat in my living room and she said, "Can I ask you something?" Of course. Did Marcus ever talk about that night with Ryan, before it happened, the argument in the parking lot? I said he hadn't had time, that the accident had happened on the way home. She nodded. She'd known that. She was asking something else. I keep thinking, she said, about what he must have felt in the car, after he couldn't talk Ryan out of it and he got in anyway, whether he was scared, whether he was just annoyed, whether he was looking at his phone or watching the road, or she stopped. I said I think he probably thought it would be okay. Yeah, he had a talent for that, believing things would be okay. It wasn't denial, he was usually right. He was an optimist in the specific way of someone who had mostly been lucky. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that costs something. He told me that about himself, she said. He said, I've been lucky, I'm aware of it. I thought of him saying that, heard him say it in my head. Can I show you something? Priya said. She took out her phone and showed me the last text Marcus had sent her. The night he died. 12:41 a.m., 16 minutes before the accident. It said, heading home. Ryan got a little out of hand tonight lol. Making sure he gets to bed okay first. Call you tomorrow. I read it twice. Heading home. Making sure he gets to bed okay first. He was going to make sure Ryan got to bed okay. That's what he was doing. At 12:41 in the morning, after an argument in a parking lot about keys, my son was still thinking about making sure his friend got to bed okay. I handed the phone back to Priya. She said, I thought you should have that. I thanked her. Then I went to the bathroom and sat on the closed lid of the toilet for a while. Here is something nobody tells you about grief that arrives mixed with betrayal. It doubles back on itself. Regular grief is a straight line, more or less. It curves and slows and sometimes you walk backwards on it, but it generally goes from the worst moment towards something livable. Grief mixed with betrayal doesn't do that, it loops. Because every time you feel like you've gotten somewhere with the loss, you hit the betrayal again from a new angle, and it pulls you back to the original wound. I would have a good morning. I would make coffee and grade the papers I was still doing part-time as a substitute, and Marcus would be in the back of my mind, the way he always was now quietly present the way the dead stay present when you've loved them. And I'd think I'm getting through this, and then I'd remember the parking lot, the argument, the keys, and then I'd remember the text, asterisk making sure he gets to bed okay first. And then I wasn't getting through it anymore. I started seeing a therapist in May. Her name is Deb. She has a small office with a lot of plants, and she doesn't try to make things make sense, which is what I needed. Someone who would sit with me in the not making sense without reaching for the resolution. The thing Deb said that helped most wasn't a technique or a reframe. It was this. You can be grateful Ryan told the truth and furious it took him 11 days. Those aren't contradictions. I'd been treating them as contradictions. I'd been trying to pick one. Hate him or not, grateful or not, forgive or not, she said, you don't have to choose. Tom and I hit a rough patch in July. I'm telling you this because I think it matters, and because people don't talk about it enough, what grief does to the people who share it. You'd think shared loss would bring you together, and sometimes it does. But sometimes it makes the person next to you into a kind of mirror, and you can't look at the mirror without seeing everything you're trying not to see. Tom dealt with the Ryan situation by going into motion. He called lawyers. He made decisions. He coordinated the calendar. When things needed doing, he did them, and when decisions needed making, he made them, and I was grateful and also, somewhere underneath the gratitude, beginning to feel a specific kind of loneliness that I didn't have the word for yet. I dealt with it by going still. I sat. I thought, I went over things. I was useful in no practical ways for about 4 months, and I understood this and I couldn't do anything about it. What happened between us wasn't a fight. Tom and I don't fight. We're not that kind of people. What we did instead was slowly drift to opposite sides of the house, occupying the same space in different rooms, each of us convinced we were being careful not to burden the other. Each of us alone in a way we hadn't been in 28 years of marriage. It took us until August to say the word. We're not okay. We said it at the kitchen table, both of us having arrived at it separately and finding ourselves there at the same time. The way you sometimes end up in the same room without planning to. Tom said, I think we need help. I said, I know. We started couples therapy in September, Dr. Miriam Welch, a different therapist for different purposes, Deb for me alone, Miriam for us together. It helped. Slowly, imperfectly, the way things actually help rather than the way they help in movies. Progress in therapy never looks like what you think it will look like. It looks like a Tuesday afternoon, where something you've said 15 times finally makes contact with something your husband has felt 15 times, and you both go quiet, and in the quiet something shifts. What came out in those sessions, which I hadn't fully understood until I said it out loud, I was angry at Tom for moving into action so quickly. It felt like skipping something. Like he had bypassed the part where we just sat with the fact that our son was gone. Like he was trying to solve Marcus's death the way you solve a problem, and the solving of it made the death feel somehow lesser, more manageable, more like something with a resolution. And Tom was afraid of me, not of me as a person, but of my stillness. Of what it might become. He'd been watching me and worrying that I was going under, slowly, silently, and he didn't know how to reach me, so he had been managing everything around me instead. Building a structure he hoped would hold me up without me having to ask for it. We were both trying to protect each other from the grief. Neither of us was protecting each other from the loneliness. That's the thing about losing a child. It's not just the child you lose. It's the marriage you had around the child, the version of yourselves you were as parents. You have to find out if there's a version of you as a couple that exists outside of that, and you have to find out while you're the most exhausted and most broken you've ever been. We found it. I think, we're still finding it. It's ongoing. A year after Marcus died, I went back to teaching. Not full-time. 2 days a week at the elementary school 4 blocks from our house. 3rd grade again, which is the age I've always thought matters most. Old enough to understand some things. Young enough that you can still shape the way they think about honesty. The first day back, I stood at the classroom door before the bell and looked at the 23 8-year-olds filing in. They didn't know anything about me, except that I was the substitute who came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They were carrying water bottles and backpacks and half-eaten granola bars and whatever weight 3rd graders carry, which is less than it will become but is already more than nothing. I thought, I am going to be okay in this room. The room is going to be okay. And it was. That's the thing I hadn't expected. The classroom was not a place where the grief waited for me. It was a place where there were other things. 23 small people with specific names and specific problems, and the particular quality of attention that children give to an adult who is actually paying attention back. Marcus had visited me at school once, about 3 years before he died. He'd come to drop something off and I'd shown him the classroom while the kids were at lunch. He'd walked around it slowly, looking at everything. the drawings on the walls, the spelling charts, the reading corner with the bean bag and the basket of books. He said, "You spent 20 years doing this." I said, "Almost." He said, "That seems like a good way to have spent 20 years. I've thought about that a lot since. Not a dramatic statement, just a simple one, a recognition." Which is what Marcus did. He noticed things, and he said them plainly, and it felt like more than it would have been from someone else because it was him. The first week back, a boy named Eli got caught cheating on a spelling test. He was 8 years old. He'd written the answers on his hand in pencil so light it was almost invisible. He'd been very careful. He still got caught. I took him into the hallway and asked him why he'd done it. He gave me the standard 8-year-old answer. I didn't study and I was scared. I told him what I tell every child in this situation, that the scared feeling makes sense, that the impulse to take the easy way out makes sense, that what matters is what you do with the impulse. He asked, "What should I do with it?" I said, "Feel it and then tell the truth anyway." He asked, "Is it always that hard?" I thought about Ryan standing in the third pew of a church, 11 days after an accident with his best friend's parents, 10 feet away. I thought about the calculation that had happened at that intersection in a fraction of a second, and the 11 days that followed, and the particular courage, and the particular cost of choosing the truth that much too late. I said, "Sometimes it's very hard. But it gets harder the longer you wait." Eli nodded, the way 8-year-olds nod when they've heard something that goes in somewhere real. I let him go back to the classroom. And I stood in the hallway for a moment, just myself and the institutional linoleum and the smell of chalk and the particular quiet of a school building when everyone is settled. I thought, Marcus tried to give him his keys. I thought, even at the end, he was trying to make sure Ryan got to bed okay. I went back to the classroom. I heard from Ryan's mother Carol 6 months after the sentencing. A letter, actual paper. Her handwriting, which I recognized from 20 years of birthday cards and Christmas cards, and the occasional note she'd leave when she dropped something off at the house. I'm not going to reproduce what she wrote. It's hers. But I want to tell you the part that has stayed with me. She wrote about the day Ryan was 8 years old and fell off his bike in front of our house, and Marcus had run inside and got me because Ryan was bleeding and embarrassed, and trying not to cry. And Marcus had stayed with him the whole time while I cleaned up the scrape talking to him about something completely unrelated, some baseball thing, so Ryan would have something to listen to other than his own pain. She said, Marcus was always doing that. Finding the thing that would help. She said, I think Ryan has been trying to figure out how to be that for you, and he doesn't know how, and neither do I, and I'm sorry. I read the letter twice and put it in the drawer where I keep things I need to sit with. I want to tell you where I am now, because I think honesty is the point and vague gestures at healing aren't honest. Marcus has been gone for 14 months. I am not over it. I will never be over it. The language of getting over things was invented by people who haven't lost a child, and I have released myself from trying to speak it. What I have is this. I have Tom, imperfect and struggling and present, showing up to therapy and to the kitchen table and to the Sunday mornings when I can't get out of bed and need someone to bring coffee. I have Priya, who sends me a text on the 23rd of every month because that's the date. Never a long message. Usually just, thinking of him today, sometimes just his name. I always write back. I have my classroom. 2 days a week, 8-year-olds who need someone to tell them that telling the truth is worth it even when it costs something. I am perhaps uniquely qualified for this at the moment. I have my therapist Deb, who will sit in the not making sense with me for as long as I need. I have Gerald Hooper, who called Tom last month to say he'd started a scholarship in Marcus's name at the community college. A small one. For students in logistics and supply chain. He'd read the obituary. He wanted to do something with the thing that had happened to him. I cried for 20 minutes when Tom told me that, not sad crying, or not only sad. The kind that happens when someone does something so unexpectedly generous that it cracks something open. Gerald Hooper had a green light and a clean conscience and 2.5 weeks of believing the worst, and his response to all of it was to find a way to say this man's name means something. To put that meaning into something concrete. A scholarship. Every year, some student in logistics gets a small amount of money and doesn't know that the reason it exists is a Tuesday night in March, and a lie that lasted 11 days, and a truth that finally came out in a church. They'll carry Marcus forward without ever knowing it. I find that strange and right in equal measure. I called Gerald Hooper to thank him. It was the first time I'd spoken to him directly. He has a quiet voice, careful. The voice of someone who has been carrying something and is figuring out what to do with it. He said, I just wanted him to be remembered for what he was, not for how he died. I said, that's all any of us want for the people we love. He said, I know, I'm sorry it fell to me to try. I said, I'm glad it was you. And I meant it. The people who get hurt in these things are never just the obvious ones. And sometimes the ones you least expect find the most human way to respond. And Ryan, I haven't seen him since the day he walked off my porch. He will be out on parole in a few months if the timeline holds. I don't know what I'll do when that happens. I'm trying not to decide in advance. Tom thinks I should write him a letter. My therapist thinks I should wait until I know what I want to say. My sister thinks I should never contact him again, and has made this clear on several occasions, with the particular emphasis of someone who watched you fall apart for a year, and has strong opinions about what caused it. Priya, when I asked her, said, I think Marcus would have found a way to be angry and also not let it end there, but I don't think you're obligated to be Marcus. That's the most useful thing anyone has said to me about it. I don't think you're obligated to be Marcus. I've thought about Ryan in prison. I've tried not to, and I've failed because 18 years don't evaporate. I've thought about what it must be like to live inside what he did. Not just the accident, but the lie, the 11 days, the church, all of it. I've thought about whether the weight of it gets lighter over time, or whether it's the kind of thing you carry at the same weight for the rest of your life. I don't have an answer. I'm not sure I'm entitled to one. What I do know is that Ryan Caswell stood up in a church and told a truth that was going to cost him everything, when he could have stayed seated. He could have stayed seated and filed the paperwork and walked away from Marcus's death as the grieving best friend, and nobody would have known. The dash cam was inconclusive. The witnesses conflicted. He had already gotten away with it. He chose not to stay seated. I am not prepared to call this forgiveness. I may never be. But I am prepared to acknowledge that the choice cost him something, and that the impulse that drove it, I think of Marcus, he told me, he would have told the truth in a second, was real. That Marcus was in that church too, in some way. That what Ryan was trying to do was not just to tell the truth but to be, in some small and too late way, the person his friend had always believed he was. That doesn't make it okay. But I think of my 14-year-old son on a bicycle with Ryan on the handlebars, in the dark, getting his friend home safe. I think of all the years of that particular friendship, the way it shaped them both, and I think it was real. Whatever else it became, whatever it cost us all, it was real. He tried to give Ryan his keys. He got in the car anyway. He spent the drive home thinking it would probably be okay. He texted Priya at 12:41 that he was making sure his friend got to bed okay. That's who he was. That was his particular brand of loyalty, his particular brand of love, the kind that shows up at 1 in the morning and gets in the car and stays. I am not Marcus. I am 54 years old and I am broken in specific and irreparable ways, and I do not have his talent for finding the thing that will help, but I'm working on it. Here's what I want to leave you with, not advice. Not a lesson. I'm tired of grief being required to produce a lesson. Just this. My son spent the last 20 minutes of his life trying to take care of someone who had already stopped taking care of him. That is not a cautionary tale. That is not evidence that he was naive or too trusting, or needed to be harder. That is just who he was, and I am furious that the world didn't protect him better. And I am also, on the days when I can get there, profoundly glad that the last thing he was doing was exactly what he always did. He was looking after someone, he was trying to help. That's Marcus, 26 years old, logistics coordinator, optimist, the person who stays. That's my son. If this story stayed with you, leave me a comment. Tell me about someone you've loved who was that kind of person. The ones who stay, the ones who always find the thing that helps, The world is full of them and we don't say their names enough. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and take care of the people around you. Take their keys when they offer them. This is Closest Enemies. I'll see you next time.